in my estimation, the question broadens. It's not how do we get the cheapest power now? It's how do we ensure that we have cheap power now, but we also have power when we need it.
I trust your positions. Do you want to give any background or?
I've been modeling power systems for a few years now. You can keep it pretty simple. I've done a lot of analysis in pretty much every North American ISO in terms of modeling grid fundamentals. Um, Specifically, I've spent a lot of time in Texas,
Mhm.
and funnily enough, I did a lot of modeling for Alberta, which your Alberta bias is it's kind of funny. I started talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's awesome, and I guess we'll just jump right into it, and I'll give you the first question. So we've chatted about energy bottlenecks before, but can you talk a little bit more about why they occur and what's been happening specifically in the ERCOT case?
Yeah, sure. Give me 1 second, and I'm gonna pull up a couple just to have a map kind of in the background.
Perfect. Okay,
Let me know if you can see
go
it.
go ahead.
Okay, so on the screen you'll see ERCOT's real-time LMP map. So basically, what this is it's mapping out ERCOT's nodes as representation of what the price at each node is in real time. I know that was a little bit of a word salad, but basically, if I move my mouse over this, it indicates what the wholesale price of energy at that node is.
Mm-hmm.
And for most of them, there is very little discount or disconnect between each node. So most of these are in the 40s, specifically the low 40s, probably within 5 or 10 bucks of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Any of those deltas with this, it looks like in general there's not a lot of transmission binding at the moment. There's not a lot of energy that's stuck in one place and trying to get to other places,
Mm-hmm.
with some notable exceptions, as I'm sure you can see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, right now, this is a pocket of wind generation in South Texas that has historically been pretty constrained. So here, the power prices, as you can see, are quite different from the rest of the system.
Mm-hmm.
So you would infer that between this set of nodes in the south and the broader set of nodes in ERCOT, that there's a transmission mind from getting energy in this pocket out. Um, Otherwise, you would expect that the prices in the rest of the system would lower some, and the prices in this pocket of the system would rise some.
Mm. And so
And
just for my clarity, there is a lot of colors here. Um,
Mhm.
so so you're saying like the green colors are kind of in the 40s, and then
Mhm.
um, it looks like blue is getting close to negative
Yeah,
power prices.
and
Yeah.
but if you track my mouse,
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that the price at the node that my mouse is over currently is negative $30.
Okay.
Um, Over here we have -5 in this pocket in the south, and -$50.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm gonna move my mouse only slightly over,
Mm-hmm.
and the price at this node is $138.
Yeah.
So these transmission issues exist on a very large scale, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of power getting out of this pocket into the rest of Texas, and at a very small scale, which is power getting from this pocket into direct, like very, very close nodes. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
it just updated. It
Oh,
looks like we have another one.
interesting.
No, actually, this is a this is a minimum back down price.
Okay.
So basically, this is like a clearing price. You can't see it, but the number on the screen is currently -$3,466,
Oh,
which
okay. Yeah.
seems ridiculous. It's a function of the sched. So there's a unit here that can't back down any farther than it actually is right now. Um,
Interesting.
Basically, it's saying this is the cost that we incur right now to make sure that we stay online at the capacity. So this is probably it it is a combined cycle that's probably running at minimum capacity, and this is
Mm.
just the price that it has bid to make sure that it stays online. That's my
Uh,
understanding right now, and if I misspoke, then I'll correct it, but that's why that chunk of the screen just turned very, very dark blue.
okay.
So that's just the sked being resolved every 5 or so minutes, which is the security constrained economic dispatch, or the dispatch model that ERCOT utilizes. Everyone utilizes, but this is ERCOT's dispatch that tries to match lowest cost power to load every in every instance. So complicated. Uh, well, it's a pretty simple in theory, but
Yeah.
it gets rapidly complicated with bidding behavior and where everything is and LMPs and stuff like that. But let's just say that for right now, um, focus on the South Texas wind because this is a persistent one. This one in the next 5 minutes will go away
Hmm.
once the system resolves. But focusing on this, the matter of building transmission, it's always tough.
Hmm.
Um, when you're planning your projects and you're planning transmission, um, let's say you're planning projects on existing transmission. Um, you can only account when you're planning. You can only really say these are the conditions that we've experienced historically,
Hmm.
and these are the conditions that we expect to exist in the future,
Hmm.
based on your best estimation of what currently exists and what will exist in the near future.
Hmm.
In Texas, you have hundreds of gigawatts of new resources trying to interconnect.
Yep.
Obviously, some percentage of them will, but guessing where those things will connect and when is it's not exactly a crapshoot,
Hmm.
but it's not an exact science. A lot of it is a little bit of game theory where, if everybody decides to connect at the same place, everyone gets screwed at that place.
Yeah.
Um, so the matter of building transmission or expanding existing transmission boils down to, you have to establish the need for the transmission. So obviously there is some transmission need here, and
Hmm.
it can be realized by the amount um, of delta in price between inside the pocket and outside the pocket.
Hmm.
If your price outside the pocket is $70 higher than inside the pocket, then obviously there's some financial incentive to connect the two and take advantage of that delta.
Hmm.
Um, you have to figure out how much it's going to cost. I was doing just some rudimentary uh, looking into transmission costs, and of course it depends by area, but $9 a megawatt hour is what I was seeing for ERCOT. I'll have to look it up again.
Yeah.
I had file it, but I'll show it to you. But
Yeah,
um,
that's in line. So the estimates that I've seen are kind of the low end being $3 a megawatt hour, and then the high end being like $40 to $50 a megawatt hour.
okay, then
And
then then pretty. Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So it's like a tenfold kind of delta and like change possibility, but yeah, I think it just kind of depends on a whole host of factors.
Right.
And I've made it clear to you, like I'm not saying that this trend, like transmission lines, are easy by any
Hmm.
means. Oh, there we go. It looks like it's
Yeah.
getting better up there. And so I think this gets kind of into my next question, though. Like, what would the mitigation strategies be? So obviously, there's like some level of like kind of free market where there's going to be these pockets of kind of highest value of like, okay, this is always
Hmm.
constrained. I can make some money here if I push this out to here and do an optimization strategy. And I'm going to largely trust the people doing those economic analyses because they're trying to make money. And I mean, that's the fundamental
Yep,
benefit of
that's the market
capitalism.
for you.
Yeah. And so, at least in the Texas case, I see a couple of things that seem like low hanging fruit, as it were. Is one, it looks like they're building a ton of battery storage facilities,
Yep.
BESS, all over. And I imagine that that would certainly mitigate some of the concerns.
Abs- hmm
And this may be something to think about, and for people kind of viewing it to think about as well. But I like to think of battery storage systems more akin to something like a natural gas plant, in that it can output power, it can output variable amounts of power. And a natural gas plant is essentially a battery storage facility in that you have to get chemical energy to it, and that chemical energy is burnt, and then power is output from it. And that's the same
Oh,
thing with a storage facility.
beautiful. I love it. And absolutely. I think of batteries as very much as peakers.
Mm-hmm.
And the only question, in my estimation, the only difference is energy density and the infrastructure required. So for peaking plants, you obviously require the gas infrastructure to get gas from, you know, somewhere that you don't need it to somewhere that you need it.
Like Alberta.
And that's that. Absolutely, and that's the question. And the battery, it's just it's a peaker that operates using the energy already provided for the grid. So it's already, taking one step out of one layer of complexity out of the equation
Mm-hmm.
by not relying on another integrated, um I'm blanking on the word, but another integrated system, that being the gas distribution system, which kind of
Yeah.
shat the bed during Uri.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely. The only question about batteries for me is, like, how many do you need to build?
Mm-hmm.
And in energy droughts, how much needs to remain charged? How much do you basically have to have constantly charged? Or how do you predict situations where you need, like, 5 days of charge
Mm-hmm.
on a whole fleet of batteries to provide grid reliability? And I
Yeah.
think that is the question.
Yeah, and that will get into kind of the next question that I had, and a little bit into the copper plate area of the principle on the copper plate is it really depends on how far you can transmit power. So if we're looking at just
Mhm,
the ERCOT case, the like around 600,000 square kilometers.
mhm.
Um, in that case, it looks like your battery storage, and I'm going to pull this off the top of my head a little bit, but it's probably going to be in the about 5 day range, possibly 10 day area. But that
Mhm.
starts to diminish pretty dramatically as you get to the 1,000 square kilometer range, and then further. And obviously, that's going to depend a lot on geography. Like if you have a big mountain range between two things, and you can transmit power across that,
Mhm.
then you're kind of getting two different geographies and wind profiles and things like that, versus like a flat plain, um, where you would probably need a bigger copper plate, as it were. So the at least the theoretical principle is that if you can transmit power by hop stepping, so you don't necessarily need to transmit 3,000 kilometers, but if you have the ability for 3,000 kilometers of interconnection to exist in capacities of at least 15% of your energy system, then the number reduces dramatically down to 4 hours. And that's where, when I had my conversation with Decarbonize, that plays a big role into calculating the total mineral demand required, because there's a huge difference between 5 days of storage and 4 hours of storage, or 28 days of storage, or whatever the answer might be, in terms of just mining, like physical mining capacity.
Right.
Um,
Like, I imagine, like, let's say that we were talking about the ERCOT grid, and we were
mhm,
assuming a total renewables blackout for 5 days, which
mhm,
is unreasonable because, of course, you're going to have solar for some part of that.
mhm,
I can imagine a 5 day wind drought, but a 5 day solar drought seems less likely.
mhm,
Um, but even saying that, if you have a peak demand of 85 gigawatts and an average demand in that series of days, like 70 gigawatts, then the amount of energy that you need to store, assuming, like, let's just assume total renewables.
Mhm.
So get rid of the stack and say total renewables. Let's just hypothetically, how much energy would you need to store? It would be 70 gigawatts, which is
Mhm.
the average demand over each day, times 5 times 24.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
And that is, to me, that number is so astronomically high
Mhm.
that it kind of makes my mind go blank when I think about the amount of lithium that needs mined. And I don't
Ye-
doubt our ability to mine it, but it's like if we get better at mining lithium, we'll just up the energy demand. It's I think there's
Yes.
a name for that paradox where you, like, by increasing the availability of something, you actually increase its use. So the
Yeah.
actual amount you need to use it goes up along with
Yeah.
the supply.
Yeah. So I guess where I would push back a little bit on that is um, the interesting part about when we say 4 hours or anything like that is that's like 4 hours where you have zero energy capacity. But a lot of the time, and if you saw the video that I did about the American energy system, a lot of the time you might only be pulling down. I can show it on the actual video, but you might only be drawing down a few hours here and there of the total demand. And then when we look at 4 hours on a country-wide scale, is a
Mhm.
lot different than 4 hours on a local scale. And I think that's also the context to think about is like um, how much of that power system can you transport and integrate. And that's what a lot of the studies that I've looked at do is they take kind of all these historical droughts and information for renewable systems versus the like ERCOT or CAISO or whatever AESO different regions, and then figure out how much interconnection would be needed um, uh, through transmission lines. And in certain cases, it's like some of those transmission lines need very high capacities, like 50 gigawatts. So it's not obviously not going to be
Mhm.
one transmission line, but you just need that amount of transmission available. And so that ends up being, from my understanding, about 91,000 miles of transmission
Is
would
that
be.
taking into account the existing upgrades that would need to be made?
No, that would just be the interconnections between the regions. So that wouldn't be the local areas.
Mhm.
And a lot of the studies are basically like, yeah, we have actually pretty good interconnection from like BC down to California, and then like Quebec, kind of down into the uh, fuck,
Yeah, from Quebec
I
down
forget
into
your
the
yeah,
NISO,
yeah,
yes, and
yeah.
ISO in England, yeah.
Yeah, but then the across is where you start to get into a little bit of trouble. Um,
Absolutely. I think there has been some progress on, I think I recently saw an announcement that they were making some progress on an what's the word? An inter ISO transmission line that was connecting east and west. So kudos
mhm,
to that. And I always think that those are great, but it's a question of like once you take care of the low hanging fruit, the
mhm,
marginal value of each additional transmission line to get your reliability needs is going to be lower
mhm.
in the same way that your marginal value of any renewable resource is going to be lower as you build more.
Yep.
And it's a question of how much do you want to pay for the marginal unit versus a different type of technology. And that's
Mhm.
it's just how much is this going to cost? Like I don't think anyone seriously thinks that if we really really wanted to, we couldn't get to 100% renewables with battery. It's a question of how much is it going to cost
Mhm.
versus a similar system with more firm resources. I personally favor nukes because in the long run, they're always the cheapest, they're always the most efficient, and they're always the most reliable. But I totally get that we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot for half a century, and that's rough. It's rough
Yeah.
to see yourself, an entire industry shoot itself in the foot like that.
Yeah, and I think that's largely the position that I hold as well. I think if we were having this conversation in the 70s, and if I could snap my fingers and do anything, it would have been the uh like play God, as it were. It would be that we didn't stop the nuclear programs back then, because we probably wouldn't have a climate crisis, as it's called, if we hadn't done that. But I think, yeah, that gets into, it really gets into the economics of it. And like I said, the papers that I've shown, I think the economics are pretty clear on, like, they include the cost of transmission, they include the cost of upgrades, they include the cost of batteries and renewable systems and hydro and all of this, and take into account the length of time that you can keep nuclear plants running,
Mhm.
and all of those things. And obviously there's going to be some level of minutia and probably cases where that may not be the best case. There may be things of, like, if you're up in Nunavut or Northwest Territories, that, like, the small modular nuclear reactors, even if they're costing like $7,000 or $8,000 per kilowatt to build, they're still worthwhile in those cases. I can totally conceive of cases where that would be the case.
Mhm.
But I think overall, we're seeing, yeah. And I guess I would just, I think people smarter than me and are making these economic decisions of, like, what's the best to do.
Mhm.
And I largely kind of trust them within the capital market. And I think if we kind of reduce a lot of the barriers to nuclear, it still probably wouldn't be chosen. But I can understand from the perspective of maybe like a holistic approach of, like, a top-down, like, government perspective, then maybe some of you might want to build some more of this, like, nuclear firm loading, or at least invest in it and go in that direction. But I think you could also make the argument for, then, well, if we're doing that, then you would also make the argument for the long line transmission, and it would still be an economic trade-off, even if it's government money. As much as we'd like to joke probably about the government being inefficient and ineffective with spending money, they still do economic analyses and still have some level of competence. I know that can be a contentious statement, but
I have a joke for you.
Okay.
The government in this town is excellent and uses your tax dollars efficiently.
Yeah, pretty controversial right there. I don't know. Uh, no, but
so, yeah.
I very much get what you're saying, and it kind of goes to the fundamental of what incentive structure you're trying to build.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you develop an electricity market, you're developing a set of incentive structures that are supposed to minimize costs while maximizing whatever the type of system that you're trying to build is. Right now, we have an electricity market that says you're setting you're setting the amount of demand and you're setting the amount of supply. So if you're short of supply, there's an incentive to build more supply because you'll get paid higher because the marginal cost that you'll achieve will be higher if I know, again, a word salad, but it it's
Yeah.
easy to see the connection between energy markets and minimizing cost of energy,
Yep.
and that's fine. And historically, that's I kind of been the way that it goes. But I think as we get more renewables and um, because of their intermittency, that equation becomes more complicated because the question is, in my estimation, the question broadens. It's not how do we get the cheapest power now? It's how do we ensure that we have cheap power now, but we also have power when we need it. And I think we're going to actually talk about that later when we talk about PPAs
Yeah.
and why
Yeah.
I
I was
think
going to say
that
that this is a good segue into kind of the other discussions that we've had. If you want to go into PPAs and CRMs, I know you really like the ERCOT CRM system.
oh,
So
beautiful. Honestly, I think it's neat because the way capacity remuneration mechanisms work in a lot of North American markets is via the capacity auctions, where basically certain resources can bid in at their capacity accreditation rates to goodness gracious. Sorry, I've a lot of conversations today, but basically uh, power suppliers can bid into markets saying, what's the market will say, what's the value of X megawatts of firm capacity? And power providers will bid into that market and say, hey, I will make sure to provide X amount of firm capacity this year in exchange for this amount of money. And that's fine, but as you pointed out in the past, they tend to overbid. The grid operators tend to request more firm capacity than they need, which is inefficiency.
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing is incrementally, they're saying, instead of buying capacity for a whole year, I'll buy capacity for a specific season. And the way that resources are rated will differ by season. So you'll have seasonal capacity auctions. And if you have a season where basically you need a lot of where your expected hours of highest need are overnight, then you would imagine that solar has shit capacity value because it's not providing energy when it's needed. And alternatively, if you had instances where your hours of net need were during the day and you didn't have a lot of solar, you would actually expect that your solar would have pretty decent capacity value because it's providing energy when you need it. And that the logical conclusion of that type of system is something that says we value the capacity that you have when you need capacity. And the way that ERCOT does it is in something called the Operational Reserve Demand Curve, or ORDC, which basically says we will create a curve. Everyone has access to what this curve looks like. And at every point along the curve, which is, let's see, it's x-axis is reserves, and y-axis is dollars per megawatt adder. At every point along this curve, you'll say, what are the operational reserves, and how much will you get paid if operational reserves dip to X level? So basically, you'll see at like 7 gigawatts of operating reserves. So you have 7 gigawatts more supply than your demand needs. You'll start seeing little adders being sprinkled into the real-time price. And as the reserves go away, those adders increase. And it's along a curve, and it has a cap just to make sure you don't see any funky math and power prices don't explode in some ball of fire at the end of the math. But basically, what it ensures is that you don't pay for capacity you don't need. The capacity that's online when you need it is going to get rewarded in some way. And that's what I think is absolutely lovely about the RDC. It's completely market driven, and hypothetically has no inefficiencies. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a really awesome system. From what I understand, and like I said there, I tried to go through as many of the kind of negative consequences or kind of inefficiencies within CRMs, but like I said, I knew you would have some really good really good tidbits. Like I said, it seems like the CRMs that last more than a year are kind of shit, and the ones specifically that are like a couple years out are even worse, because if a project falls through, who was bidding on it, that can screw you over. And yeah, there can obviously be a lot of problems. So it seems like the Texas system has that pretty on lock. Obviously, they need to probably do a little bit more winter proofing on their systems. Our wind turbines up here in Canada run just fine.
Whatever you
But
say, your Lethbridge pocket, if I remember correctly, is the big one
yeah,
in BC. No,
Or in
no, no,
Alberta.
Alberta. Sorry.
Alberta,
Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah. No,
you
I'm
have
just
some.
saying that there was when I was in chemical engineering, there were interesting co-op jobs that were available, and some of them were modeling the fluid mechanics of the heat exchangers
Mhm.
within wind turbines, which I know isn't a precaution necessarily in warmer climates, but obviously Texas can get a little bit screwed over when they get those snowstorms and stuff. But
Yeah, and if
that's just a
there's
little jab at Texas, little Canadian pride. We put them in when we can, you know.
yeah, whatever you say up there, mittens.
Yeah.
So no, I think Texas is kind of. I don't want to say they've learned their lesson, but it's very clear that there's like a pre and post Uri approach to climatizing resources and
Mhm.
proofing resources. So I'm not sure that you would see something like Uri happen again. I would sincerely hope not, but there are a lot of incentives that have been put forth to reduce the probability that a Uri event occurs in Texas ever again, because I think it was like a perfect storm of things. Your gas supply went shit. Gas
Mhm.
prices went through the roof. Uh, Demand was high because everyone was, freezing.
Yep.
It was a bad situation, and I think ERCOT has been actually pretty good at trying to look for those situations and preempt them, which is
Mhm.
nice. But I will say, I brought up this screen. If my screen's still sharing, I don't know if it
Yep.
is.
Yeah, it's the locational marginal price.
Yeah, yeah. And the one thing that is a little bit spooky about the ORDC is the amount of volatility it introduces to the energy market,
Hmm.
because so much value can be tied up in this reliability adder. Um, so what you're seeing here is basically just LMPs for Hub North and ERCOT over a period of a month. And you'll see for most of the hours, you have approximately zero value, $40 energy prices, whatever you want to say. But for specific subsets of hours, you have almost all of the energy value.
Hmm.
Um, that's actually phenomenal for batteries. Batteries love that. Batteries eat volatility
Yep.
like no tomorrow. Um, they're the cookie monster to the volatility cookie. Whenever I get into this, I'm like, how many batteries would you need to eat up all the volatility? And the question is, oh, you'd need a lot of batteries. But what would happen if you had more volatility than you had batteries? And you had taken away the financial incentives for there to be backup mechanisms. I know like you're always going to have a backup, but when you add stuff like this, it eats away at the economics of other units.
Hmm.
And that's what worries me sometimes. That when you optimize for the lowest energy price, you're not entirely taking into account that the energy price that you're incurring isn't it it is the energy price for energy when you need it, like right now, but it's also the cost of making sure that your grid is going to be reliable all the time.
Hmm.
Like to me, there's very little difference between those two things, even though they are thought of as differently, because they're one and the same.
Yeah. And as much as I will shit talk carbon capture and storage because I think it is a bit of an expensive thing for what it is, and broadly doesn't have great economics. I think from the firm load capacity, it
Hmm.
seems to be a relatively good solution because your natural gas plants already exist. They're already quite cheap to build in the kind of $900 per kilowatt range. Yeah,
Hmm.
you're losing 10 upwards of 40% of your energy efficiency with it, but you get to keep that firm load capacity, and keep it integrated with the grid. And that I think also starts to play into these questions of the free market aspect of this is really good, but obviously there's some level of natural monopoly that's going to occur, and that's usually where you need governments to step in, and those may be places where it's kind of almost under like a government purview, and this may be a good segue for the FERC ruling. I know we only have, I think, 12 more minutes here, so I don't know if that's enough time to go over the that ruling and kind of how it looks at long-term demands and a little bit less and at least we hope will help change the incentive structure to a little bit more long-term thinking.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I watched some seminars on the FERC ruling and sorry, the FERC order, and they say that they're going to take a more holistic view of transmission planning with an increased horizon for transmission planning studies. That being, I think, 20 years is what I was seeing. Um, Basically, they want to make sure that whatever transmission they're planning is there's a streamlined way to do it. There are channels and ways to look at cost allocation and reliability, um, impacts and cost. Sorry, already said cost allocation, but reliability impacts, price impacts, how it impacts state goals, which is something that I think was actually a little bit contentious from the other things, because basically some people are worried that if you're a state that wants to be incredibly environmentally conscious, like let's say California, and you, in order to meet that, basically you want to build a shit ton of transmission to neighboring regions, then FERC might uh, might supersede, let's say, Nevada, although Nevada is also pretty, they're a more left-leaning state, because I think Las Vegas is more left-leaning. I think they're blue. I'd have to check. Anyways, let's just say for this instance that Nevada is red.
Mm-hmm.
That basically they could help that FERC, that California's state order on transmission and renewable energy requirements would supersede Nevada's like want to keep its energy infrastructure separate,
Mm-hmm.
and that they could be roped into paying for something that they don't especially want. I think that's something I've heard, and that's been one of the clapbacks. But mostly it's been, we'll see how it goes. It's hard to see how FERC policies actually get implemented, because of course this is not the first FERC policy that's been specifically put out there to address shortfalls in the transmission planning and implementation procedure, and yet we still have a lot of bottlenecks. So I think the general consensus is wait and see,
Mm-hmm.
but at
Yeah.
least they're trying to consolidate and put stuff over a longer time frame, a longer time horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously there's a little bit of ignorance from the Canadian perspective as well. I mean, we get a lot of American politics up here, so the states' rights kind of drumbeat of fuck you, don't tell me what to do seems to be relatively prevalent, at least from the Canadian onlooker perspective.
Mhm.
It'd probably be less so of an issue here in Canada because there's I guess a little bit more continuity between the provinces. It seems, but yeah, it will be interesting. I sent you one last question about a copper plate, but I think that might be good to save for another time. If you ever want to
Mhm.
jump on my stream and argue with me or tell me I got something wrong in a video, always happy to hear the feedback.
Oh, you
But
you you always do. I'm of course messing around, but I like the copper plate is, to me, what it sounded like when we were talking about the copper plate. It's like, imagine you're a logistics company, like let's say Amazon, and you are making your model for how to dispatch trucks to most efficiently, you know, um, deliver packages to a consumer based.
Mhm.
Now imagine that there's no congestion,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's like, well, okay, I
Yeah.
like that image, but
Yeah.
is it commensurate with reality?
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. It's yeah, I understand that maybe I haven't explained copperplate properly, and sometimes I get this issue where I'm like fucking reading papers all the time, and so some of this stuff I'm just like, oh yeah, everybody must know this thing, and it's some like obscure reality in fact, and I have to like bring myself back to reality, as it were, and be like, wait, no, you have to actually explain this stuff properly. And so yeah, the copperplate is just the idea that like energy can be transmitted. Um, distances. But there's obviously a lot of mechanics and important things associated with that. And that's why part of the mandate within the EU specifically, because the EU is certainly leading this charge, is that at least 15% of your grid can get offloaded to your neighboring states. And in many cases, a number of those countries already have that capacity because energy trading is already quite common between the states or the different countries there.
Mhm.
So much so that we were seeing Spain just offloading tons and tons of renewables in April to France.
Not
Yeah.
not to shit on the EU too much, but like,
Oh boy.
but it's comparing energy growth in the EU versus in North America. I haven't looked a ton at energy growth in the EU, but I have seen a lot of it in North America. And using economic growth models as a proxy, um, I know that North America has grown so much faster than the EU in the last few years, and it's projected to continue growing much faster. For in terms of economic terms, I know Nvidia just passed a $3 trillion market cap, and I know that money is fake and everything, but $3 trillion is larger than the GDP of France.
Yeah.
Like, you have three companies in Santa Clara County, California, and Santa Clara,
Yeah.
whatever the county in California where Silicon Valley is, that combined have like a higher GDP than Europe.
Yep.
It's when you say like Europe has planned this innovative new approach to grid policy and design. It's neat, but they're not growing. We're
Oh,
growing, and we're growing at a pace
yeah.
pace pace faster than we ever have
Yeah.
before ever.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not disagreeing with that. All I'm saying is that it's not some out there impossibility. It can clearly be done and be accomplished, and for a rich and powerful country like the United States, I'm sure they have the money and capabilities to build even better long line transmission power lines and rapid train systems across their nation.
Oh, that last hit was good. Now, whether or not I mean, well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, you know how well long high speed train has gone in the U.S.
Oh
It's
yeah,
You'd think that it is something that you should be able to build as a global power with
superpower.
hey, you don't have to bandwagon that hard. But
I'm just saying.
it's
It's weird that this nation that isn't growing economically can build trains and power lines, and this super powerful American nation seems to have so much trouble doing. I'm just talking shit, but
no, I totally get it, but it's like, sorry, I was lost in a fit of American rage. I heard the Eagles calling my head, and I lost my train of thought.
yeah,
Um, but it's hard to build stuff
yeah.
in the U.S. Like, I was looking at costs for building transmission in California or something like that, and we're talking on the order of $1 million miles or $10 million miles, depending. I know, and I know that we're reaching end of time, so I don't want to go on too far. But
Mhm.
transmission is very resource intensive to maintain. Like
Yep.
foliage management makes up a
Hmm.
huge portion of costs for all transmission providers.
Yep.
If you add more transmission, if it's underground, it's more expensive to build upfront. Of course, it's easier to
Hmm.
manage in the long term in terms of foliage management because you don't have to worry about trees falling on stuff underground, probably.
Hmm.
Um, but if you build it above ground, of course, you have to worry about foliage management. And when you talk
Hmm.
about very distributed systems, the cost of managing that foliage grows exponentially, which means that in situations where, let's say, there's a hurricane or you have fires and there are a lot of power lines down, the cost to repair and basically make your system more resilient is higher than a more centralized system.
Hmm.
There are
100%.
trade-offs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, and yeah, we'll probably leave it there. And as always, come bug me on stream Tuesday nights at 6 MST. I'll be playing Baldur's Gate and and talking about
You
Canadian
woke
politics.
liberal shill.
Yes, yes. That's in fact what I named my character. So. Uh, but yeah, I'll leave it there. But thanks so much for talking to me, buddy. I always
No,
appreciate it.
I always appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much for the questions and honest questions and not I like gotcha moments. I always appreciate that very much. I just enjoy talking about this with people who also are interested in actually thinking and solving problems. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.